So this is Zan with Saturday Scholars here. Today I am visited by Patrick from BeavermanBeat, who covers the Oregon State football team. Thank you for joining me, Patrick. Appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here. I'm happy that it's that time of the year again to start talking some football. I was covering baseball for a while, but if you can't tell, I'm pretty excited. I'm ready to
Yeah,
go.
man.
I'm ready to rock.
I love it. I love it. So here at the Saturday Scholars, we're all over. We're all over Oregon State. We like the over. We think they're a good team this year. We love what they have, man. So a lot of retention with the coaching staff there. Jonathan Smith returns. You return your OC, your DC, and I mean overall, very well balanced team last year. We love the Beavs, and I think they're one of those programs that don't get a lot of respect, and that's another reason we kind of wanted to do a whole discussion here about Oregon State. So we do appreciate the Beavs, and let's go ahead and dive right into this, man. So
Let's do it.
I guess it's not lost on people that Oregon State had really, really bad quarterback play last year. But despite this, they were still able to put together a 10-win season, which we found very impressive. I mean, between Jebbia and Noland, you guys didn't really have much production at all.
Right.
Um, so I'd like to know what your opinion is on DJU and Aiden Chillis. And because we know Aiden Chillis is getting actually a lot of hype right now and that he could be the
Yeah.
future past DJU. I just want to know what's your opinion on this because you guys were 38th in offensive efficiency despite having basically no quarterback. So that's very impressive.
Yeah, it's something that I've thought about a lot. Obviously, getting the commitment from DJU was extremely exciting. The commitment from Childs early on, I think that's something that really played for Oregon State was they recruited him for a very long time, well before he became a four-star, a top 11, I think is the official ranking, top 11 quarterback in that class. So the future is very, very bright in that regard. And last year, I mean, you kind of hit on the head. Nolan goes down against Utah, in which was still a tight game. That's really the only blowout loss last year. But then you got to bring in Go Branson, who had never really seen a snap at that point. And that's obviously the biggest loss of the year, 42-16, I think it was. But what kind of gets lost with numbers is obviously the QBR was low, touchdowns was low, interceptions a bit on the high end. They also didn't pass the ball a lot. It's a very run-first offense, but he was a really good job at managing the game. And there's no way that a quarterback can go 7-1 and have neither game management and what you would say is like a high-class 7-1 at least skill level for a quarterback. So it's really going to come down to how far off is that going to drop off be, or is that drop off going to be? DJU obviously very highly touted out of high school. Things didn't pan out at Clemson, but in his quotes and what he's told reporters and things and people out here on the West Coast is it's a completely different offense. It's one he's much more comfortable in. Granted, he's going to have to go under center quite a bit, so I don't know how comfortable he is there. But it is a run first, set up the play action, and hit a ball over the top, which the Beavers were starting the season off against Boise State, and they perfected that. They ran the ball efficiently with a stable of backs, and Chance Nolan was connecting on the deep throws. We don't really know exactly if it was the injury that kept him out all year or not, but definitely he went down in week 4 against Utah or week 5 against Utah and never returned.
That's unfortunate, but one thing, man, I mean, you talked about your running game. Damian Martinez, I really like him as a running back, average over 6 yards a carry, almost 1,000-yard rusher. And another thing about Oregon State that a lot of people don't know is you guys produce great offensive lines year in and year out, despite not really bringing in those high blue chip prospects. So that's quite amazing. And actually, that kind of bodes into my second question is how do you feel about Jim McCalzick? Because I think he's one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, and I'm so shocked that he's been able to be retained by the Oregon State staff.
He just got a very well-deserved raise, and that's something that I think goes kind of under the radar. I mean, obviously, like the local papers cover it, but each year under this rebuild from Jonathan Smith, you've seen the assistants pool for salary grow every year. I mean, obviously, when Smith inked his contract, that was a big deal. Same thing with any other sports head coach. But they've grown that assistants pool year by year. And to my knowledge, they've only lost one in their running back coach who just left this past offseason for Baylor. But they had another guy in right away, and he seems to be doing well, already signing one, hopefully two running backs out of Texas here in the next couple of weeks. So
All right, awesome. I mean, that's something to be said. I mean, last year you guys had a great offensive line, and year before even, last year you guys were number 10 in line yards and 27 in sack rate. So there wasn't really an excuse for your quarterbacks not to play well. The line was doing their job.
right,
But
and most of those guys are coming back. The Brandon Kipper on the right side of the line, he's gone. but you're replacing him with a guy that saw plenty of snaps last year, and then a transfer in from Nevada and Grant Stark, who could be ready to play. He ran with the twos in spring ball, but he's learning the offense kind of at that rate. So the offensive line brings back almost all five, and I anticipate them being one of the stronger position groups again next year.
We also think they're going to be a very strong unit. And one thing that bodes really well is when we were trying to project how well Oregon State's offense would be, especially their pass game, we were thinking, they can't be any worse than they were last year. DJU surely has to be an upgrade. And with that, I mean, that makes their offense that much more dangerous. So that's something that we're really looking at with Oregon State, and we do like about the Beavs. And like I said and alluded to earlier, man, we really love your new recruit, Aiden Childs, or Chili's, however you say
Yeah,
his
so
name.
it's Childs. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but apparently he has some really gem upside and potential. Can you speak to that? Like, what have you heard about him?
Yeah, so I think of the entire spring game, he probably had the prettiest ball. I don't know if you've seen it. He's a right-handed guy. He's rolling to his left, pressure in his face. Obviously, spring game, so they're not really bearing down on him. But he throws it and places it in the only spot that Silas Bolden can make the catch, and the only spot that a defender can't even come close to making a play on the ball. So that was a huge highlight there. Watching him kind of play in the high school, the All-American game with I think the U.S. Army one. He performed there, ball fakes and play action game really well. We're very, very excited for him. And it's important, I guess, for me. I really like it. His parents are very active on social media, his mom, particularly with the Beavers. And they have pretty much been like, rest assured, we know that DJU was coming. Maybe not him, but they knew they were going to look for a transfer quarterback. They knew that maybe it's not Childs off the gate. So it kind of, I mean, obviously with NIL and things of that sort, I can't be completely confident, but I
Mhm.
do feel confident that if he gets 1 year, I mean, I don't know, maybe DJ comes back for a second. I'd be surprised. But give him 1, maybe 2 years to learn under somebody with a similar body style and hopefully a similar play style could be extremely beneficial for what we see as the future of the quarterback room at Oregon State.
Absolutely. There's great projection with this team, especially if you're able to retain your coaching staff. I mean, very, very good coaching staff, very high on the Beavs. Let's turn to the defense, man. So a lot of people don't know the Beavs had a top 10 defense in efficiency last year. So
Yeah.
just a very well-rounded team. So one thing that you notice with a lot of Pac-12 teams, it's very very potent offenses, very, very bad defenses. Teams like Oregon State and Utah are kind of exceptions to the rule. So one thing I'm looking at here is that it looks like based on their TARP rating, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the transfer and returning production rating, but it's basically an aggregate score that kind of factors in what they've lost, what they've brought in, and it spits
Okay.
out a number. And it's telling me Oregon State has a -5 rating, which usually indicates that there is going to be some regression. So I was wondering what you could speak to on that. I know they lost Omar Spates,
Right.
but they brought in a great defensive end from Wyoming. So I'm just curious how you think the defense projects this year compared to last year.
Yeah, the Spates transfer was a bit of a gut punch. He was a highly, I mean, it's kind of under the radar recruit, so I guess highly kind of is out of play there. But came out to the West Coast, finished his high school ball out here, came on and has really been a pivotal part of the rebuild, especially on that defense. Because when the keys were given over to Jonathan Smith, that defense was abysmal, to say the least. So, I mean, bringing in Tim Tibesar was the DC the first couple of years, and is now switched to Trent Bray, who played his college ball at Oregon State, much like Coach Smith did. So Spates leaving was a kind of a punch that I hope they had a little bit of foresight on to work around. And they also lost a lot of really talented defensive backs to the draft. 2 guys getting drafted. So you're going to have a lot of young production step up and fill in that role. Jaden Grant went undrafted, but he played that nickel safety position, and he was a 5-year player there, a 3-year captain. I think a really pivotal part of that defense. So there's definite holes that it's almost like somebody's going to have to step up and become a leader on that defense. You lost your biggest linebacker, you lost your true quote unquote captain on that side. That being said, the defensive line is probably up there with the offensive line as the deepest room on the Oregon State roster. So that's going to be a big thing for them. Incoming freshman, he gets kind of buried under the Aiden Childs hype. Kelsey Howard was a 4-star out of Nevada. He's going to come in as a true freshman. I do expect him to get some run, as well as true freshman Thomas Collins, who'll be coming in. And that's against or with a 3-4 lineup. So those guys are probably going to be coming off the edge. and hoping to kind of do what you said. It's a lot of offense in the Pac-12, so they're going to have to neutralize it. But I think
Mhm.
the weapons are there. It's just going to be quick growing up, and you got to kind of fill in really quickly.
Do you project that that defense will be as good as it was last year, or might take a step back with some learning pains, some growing pains?
I think if they play USC next year, I don't think they hold them to 17.
Oh yeah.
I think is kind of where I'm at with it. I think the secondary will regress just a little bit, just because of some inexperience. You have Alton Julian coming back, who missed all of last year with an ACL injury, but the year prior, the shortened 2020 or no, in the 2021 season, showed really glimpses of greatness. So it'd be very exciting for him to come back. Another DB in Skylar Thomas. He, before the spring game this year, he was ruled out for the season with an ACL. So one guy in, but then another guy out. So it's very much so going to have to fill in. But I do expect overall to see a regression, that hopefully that step up at quarterback play can kind of elevate back up.
Fantastic, man. That's great info. A lot of names in there that we weren't really aware of. So definitely keep our eyes on for the resurgence of those guys, or uprise of those guys.
Yeah.
So I see here, other than that, Oregon State wasn't one of those teams that lost a significant amount of people in the portal. And in today's age, that's almost unheard of. Most teams lose at least like 10 people to the portal every cycle. So
Right.
I was wondering, does that speak to Jonathan Smith's culture that he has developed over there at Oregon State?
100%. I think even with some of these guys, you mentioned his name earlier, Tristan Gebbia, he saw very minimal snaps last year. He got a couple series in the bowl game against Florida, very much so as like a nod, kind of a thank you for your time here. He got injured in the 2020 Civil War game, trying to make a goal line push to take the lead. Hamstring thing is what it looked like. Never played a significant snap again. But stayed on that program for 2 years. His whole goal was to be a coach. And I know that's exactly why he stayed, to learn under Smith and learn under Lindgren.
Uh-huh.
And he's since transferred out to Nebraska
Ohio
to be or no, I'm sorry, you're right. It
Ohio
is Ohio
State?
State.
Yeah.
To Ohio State to be a grad assistant, I believe, is his final goal there.
Okay, I was wondering why he transferred there. Yeah, we were looking at that like, he's not going to play. Why did he go there for his last year,
Yeah. I think it's 100% to learn under Ryan Day and some of the coaches they've got out there. Chance Nolan going to TCU, I think his time just kind of ran to an end at Oregon State. I'm not sure exactly behind the scenes what was going on there. Something, especially later on in the season, there was just a lack of updates on his health and his status. So I don't know there, but it does very much so speak to Smith's program. And with his recruits, this team still really hasn't produced a high-rated recruiting class. And even projecting now into 2024, you're still at almost all 3 stars. I don't think there is quite yet a 4-star recruit on there. And there's been a lot of chatter within the community that they're just finding the guys that fit and the guys that are wanting to spend 4 years here, 3, 4, 5 years, and really build into what this program is, into what the playbook reads, what the culture is. And it's all about right now, I think for Smith still is just finding the right guys as that talent continues to rise.
For sure, man. Oregon State's culture and their system there is scarily similar to that of one in Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy. You have a homegrown guy coaching at his alma mater, and then you have a team that doesn't really recruit the best. A bunch of 3-star guys, maybe some high 3-star guys highlight the top of the list, but it's all about development. So it's really interesting. And then you have the Kyle Whittinghams of the world, the guys who, Jonathan Smith's becoming that next guy, that next great coach at his alma mater. So definitely a coach that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough, and have a high appreciation for John Smith. Now, I do want to ask you 2 more questions. One's a little bit longer and one's a little bit shorter.
Okay, got it.
One question I do want to ask you is, how do you feel about conference realignment and as it stands for the Pac-12, and how it could shake out for Oregon State?
Man, the first initial kind of reaction when I got the Twitter notifications or drop downs or whatever that UCSC and UCLA were making a dash for the Big Ten, it was relatively just kind of anger, because I could kind of see where the dominoes would fall after that. Obviously, at that point, I don't think any of us really read into conference media deals and grants of rights and anything. I'm sure they knew they existed, but I didn't ever look at them or consider them. But then after taking a look, it was kind of like you can see where the dominoes might fall. And you're like, okay, if somebody's going to take the Oregon team, they're going to take their rival, which historically and market-wise probably does lean a little bit closer towards Washington, as much as every Oregon State fan is going to want to say that we hate Oregon. We do. But historically it's been a bit more of a powerhouse battle between Oregon and Washington. So I could kind of see that. I guess there weren't going to be much crumbs left at the table, if you will.
Hmm.
Now, even with brand deals and media rights deals, I still don't know where it's going to land, but I do feel better today than I did maybe. Like it wasn't even a year ago that USC and UCLA said they're going to depart.
Hmm. At what point in time, as an Oregon State fan, would you be concerned about the media rights deal not coming to fruition? Like, would it be kind of end of season for you, or?
July 21st is kind of my deadline. If I'm correct, that is day one of the Pac-12 media days. And I think if Kliavkoff can't get a deal set by then, all of media days is going to be overshrouded by that huge storm cloud overhead. And I think it will detract from anything else the conference really can have going for them. A date that I hope to pick out, I'm an optimist here, like I mentioned before we started recording, is that second week of July, right before the Big 12's media days. I think if Kliavkoff wants to kind of take a step and insert himself as kind of a powerful commissioner, as Yormark has done, as Sankey has done, it's going to be to kind of make a statement and maybe do something like that right before. It's weird on social media. It's almost turned into a rivalry between the Big 12 and the Pac-12.
It has, yeah, a little bit.
Which is kind of funky because, like I said, I never would have assumed anything about those schools or programs or ever really thought about them much unless you were playing against them. But I think that would kind of be a power play on his end.
Yeah, for sure, man. And so let me ask you this. In a worst case scenario where the Pac-12 doesn't get that media rights deal done and say a few teams leave for the Big 12, and where do you think that leaves Oregon State in a projection? Like, where do you think they may land?
If they're not going to get an invite to the Big 12, I don't foresee them getting an invite to the Big 10. Ideally, and this is kind of a stretch, I think you would. Do you know how hypothetically I'm going to go here? Because I've thought
Go
this
absolutely hypothetical.
Okay,
like the thoughts are interesting.
This is my shot to the moon. I think there's going to be problems with the ACC's rights over there with their deal being structured until 2030, which is absolutely crazy to think about.
Yeah. It's like 2032 or 2033, something crazy.
It's even past 2030.
Yeah.
I would see a football only merger possibly between those two. And then I think Oregon State would probably have to slide in to the Mountain West after that. I don't think they'd have. I mean, they're going to be partnered with Washington State. Washington State will definitely get left behind too, I think. Arizona State, maybe. Arizona State's kind of an odd one because they don't really have a huge media following, although they do reside in that Phoenix market, which is going to be highly sought after. But I think it'd either be a complete absorption into the Mountain West, or ideally I would like for them to stay somewhat relevant and play other big time programs. Such as schools out on the Atlantic coast.
Yeah, so I think one thing that we could see happening, maybe Mountain West in the meantime, but once the ACC kind of has their trickle-down effect and gets poached by all the different conferences looking to pick at them, there could be a formation of maybe like a fourth super conference with everyone else that's left over, maybe between like the American, Mountain West, and whatever's left. I mean, that's all speculation, of course, but
right.
I would hate to see programs like Washington State and Oregon State not end up in one of those premier conferences, one of the top three conferences, just because, I mean, I really value those programs who can develop their talent, not buy their talent. Right. I will say that it is frustrating because, I mean, I have an alma mater as well, not one of the bigger schools. And it is frustrating when you see your players getting poached because you can't keep up with NIL money or whatever the case may be. So I definitely understand that sentiment. So I definitely wanted your thoughts on that because a lot of Oregon State fans believe that they're, or at least on the outside from what I see on Twitter and things like that, believe that like they're Big Ten bound or whatever the case may be. So I wanted your thoughts on it. So you guys have won the Civil War 2 years in a row now. Can you make it
2 out of 3?
2 out of 3. Okay, you guys didn't.
Yeah, we haven't won at Austin yet. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I got you. How do you feel about the Civil War this year?
So this is, I guess, a little bit. You and I talked before about before we started recording about if the team can go undefeated. I think there's a big chance. Oregon has a tougher schedule than Oregon State. Oregon State has a very favorable schedule. Really, their toughest game is that game. I think there's a huge chance that we could see a 10-1 versus 10-1 matchup, and dare I say an 11-0 and 10-1. I could see that game being a Pac-12 semifinal
Mhm.
almost like a winner advances, depending on obviously how Utah and USC shake out and if Washington can maintain. Man, I mean, Oregon State was close 2 years ago. A costly fumble at the end of the game really kind of turned things on their head. It seems like it's very much so leveled out. Last year's was such an odd game. I mean, almost domination there, especially starting the second half from Dan Lanning and his team. But Oregon State, if you count the two kneels at the end of the game, ran the ball 19 straight times to make up uh, 17 points in 20 minutes, which is rather unheard of. I was at that game and was a touchdown away from, I told my friends if it was 21 plus in the fourth, I'm out.
Mm.
And it never quite got there, and I'm thankful it never did. I want to say Oregon State can go down there and win. It's going to be probably the more highly touted Civil War games that we've seen in a long time, thinking back to like 08 and 09, I think the years were when they played for a berth in the Rose Bowl. But I think if Oregon State can stay healthy, if their defensive line can stay healthy, and if their defensive backs can step up and elevate, I think they've got a really good shot to go into Autzen and kind of return this rivalry to a year in, year out. No matter where you're at, it's going to be a hell of a game.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, Oregon State, we talked about it, talent discrepancy. Oregon recruits at such a premium level, but yet Oregon State's won two of the last three. So
Only
always,
22 can play. So, you can get
that
all the
is
five stars
true.
you want. Only 22 can play.
That is true. But that's one thing I respect about those lower tier programs. I always find myself rooting for them, or at least the programs with less money. I don't want to say lower
No,
tier, but
I know what you
definitely
mean.
on the
Yeah,
way
you're
up.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
But I appreciate you joining me. Is there anything that you want to say in reference to your podcast or anything?
Yeah, I mean, if any Oregon State fans, or even I do try to talk. Obviously, it's Oregon State focused, but I do try to cover the Pac-12 quite a bit. Once this media rights deal is over, I plan to have a series almost released, because I've kind of been very much so in the whole leadership thing with Larry Scott, and now over to like George Kliavkoff, and kind of having my nose in that. So we've got a lot of ideas out there. So I really appreciate it if you guys chose to tune in. I run a solo podcast, about 30 minutes an episode, and I kind of get straight to it and get things out there and then get out of it. But I'm over at the Beaverman Beat on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and at BeavermanBeat on Twitter. So I'd appreciate if you guys want to check me out, and then hopefully we'll get some football talk rolling here soon. But thank you a bunch for having me on. This is a good time, and I'm always excited to talk Oregon State football.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate the insight. And I will put the links to your Twitter and your pod in description so people can check you
Perfect.
out. Once again, man, hey, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you very much.